Welcome back. There are very few people who have a better sense of what life is like in President Trump's orbit than my next guest. Corey Lewandowski was candidate Trump's first campaign manager, and despite having his own run-in at the time, he actually still remains close to the president. And Corey Lewandowski joins me now from his home state of New Hampshire. Mr. Lewandowski, welcome to Meet the Press.
Hey, thanks, Chuck. Great to be with you today.
All right, let me start with a little, I guess we'll call it Sunday morning quarterbacking here. Looking back, what went wrong for Reince Priebus as chief of staff? What went wrong with that relationship, in your opinion?
Well, part of it, obviously, is that the president wants to bring a new direction. And what that means is making sure his legislative agenda gets done. And what's very important to the president is fulfilling the campaign promises which he outlined. And we saw this week a legislative defeat in Congress for the repeal and replace of Obamacare. And that's something that he campaigned on. And Reince was brought in, as you know, as someone who could work with the members of the House and the Senate to get that legislative agenda done. And with that not being accomplished, the president made a decision to move in a new direction, to bring a seriousness to his chief of staff and a pivot so that he can have his agenda at the forefront of what he wants to get done.
Given that Reince Priebus and the president weren't always very close, you had a front row seat to that at times, the tense relationship between when he was chairman at the RNC and your campaign and with candidate Trump. In hindsight, was it a mistake for the president to hire somebody he wasn't personally very close to?
I think what the president decided when he was president-elect and to bring Reince on board was to bring someone in who understood Washington to help him staff his team in order to achieve his legislative agenda. And unfortunately, where we are right now, if you look at the ups and downs of the presidency so far, the single most important thing the president has been able to achieve is getting Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. It's a very important thing he's been able to achieve. But the major issues of his agenda have not been accomplished through Congress, and he's decided to make a change at the top to move his agenda forward.
And he believes that it's all Reince Priebus's fault? That he doesn't have a major legislative victory? That's at the feet of Reince Priebus?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say that, Chuck. But what I would say is, obviously, the president has a very aggressive legislative agenda. Health care, repeal and replace of Obamacare was at the top of that list. We're now moving to tax reform, where we can repatriate the money sitting overseas. We can give middle class deductions, double those, and cut taxes on small businesses. And look, what you've got with General Kelly coming in is someone who's bringing a fresh perspective. Very important, and an opportunity to communicate the president's agenda to the staff inside the White House and work closely with those members of Congress and the U.S. Senate who want to see the president's agenda done, including building the wall on the southern border. I think the general should relook at firing Richard Cordray, the CFPB. He's a person who is now all but running for governor in the state of Ohio, and he's sitting in federal office right now. And I think this general, as the chief of staff, is going to come in and put a fresh set of eyes on the inner workings of the White House and making sure the president's agenda moves. I
have to say, Corey, that was sort of a random thing you just introduced there. What's with the focus on Mr. Cordray? How is that at the top of the agenda there?
Well, I think there's three things on the agenda. It's tax reform. It's building a wall on the southern border. It's repeal and replace of Obamacare, which didn't get done. But I think Richard Cordray is somebody who is campaigning now for governor of Ohio. He's sitting in an office right now at the CFPB. And it's my recommendation to the president of the United States to fire Richard Cordray. And if he wants to go run for governor of Ohio, go do it. But my concern is that you've got an unelected bureaucrat sitting in an office right now. Yeah. And I hope that the new chief of staff looks at him moving forward and saying it's time to act decisively.
I have to ask this, considering that you brought this up. Do you have any business interest here? Do you have a client that wants to see this happen?
No, I have no clients whatsoever. But what I do know is 2 weeks ago, Richard Cordray, through the CFPB, passed a rule with the antithesis of, it's going to be about $1 trillion worth of arbitration that the government's going to have to go through right now. And he's an unelected official. He's all but announced, Chuck, that he's running for governor of Ohio. And if he wants to run for governor of Ohio, go run for governor of Ohio. But don't do so while you're sitting in a federal office right now.
Let me go back to the West Wing and how it's organized. Here's how Peter Baker and Maggie Haberman wrote about the Anthony Scaramucci, the new communications director, and the Reince Priebus feud at the time. And this was hours before Reince Priebus was fired. The clash between Mr. Scaramucci and Mr. Priebus offers a case study in how the Trump White House operates. A conflict divorced from facts, untethered from the basics of how government works, enabled by the lack of any organizational structure, and driven by ambition, fear, animosity, and envy. You may disagree with some of the tone of that, but there is a consensus that the president does like a little bit of chaos around him. How does John Kelly limit that chaos, and how does the president essentially limit himself from wanting that chaos?
I think General Kelly is going to restore order to the staff. His title is Chief of Staff, not Chief of the President. And what you have seen over the last 30 years is an unbelievably successful individual who's now the President of the United States and everything he's achieved. And the ideas that he has brought to the presidency have been something that he's talked about for a long time. And what we need now from a Chief of Staff is ensuring that everybody who works in the White House is on the president's agenda. And what I would guess moving forward is that General Kelly is going to bring the type of discipline to the staff to ensure that the leaks are stopped and that the president's agenda is foremost of what takes place in that building. So there'll be no more backbiting. There'll be no more stabbing each other in the back. And what Anthony Scaramucci has said is he's the type of person who, if he wants to stab you, he's going to stab you in the front. And what I think General Kelly wants to bring is the opportunity to make sure that everybody on the staff is working for the good of the president and not their own agenda.
Okay, last quick question. Is there one thing that John Kelly should avoid doing as President Trump's chief of staff?
Absolutely. The thing that General Kelly should do is not try to change Donald Trump. Chuck, as you know, I've said you have to let Trump be Trump. That is what has made him successful over the last 30 years. That is what the American people voted for. And anybody who thinks they're going to change Donald Trump doesn't know Donald Trump.
I think that's a good place to end. Corey Lewandowski, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your views, sir.
Thank you.